The ice stone doorway creaked open with an ominous groan, its sound resonating through the shimmering hallway like a cry of a long slumbering giant. The dense, frigid air rushed out to meet Taisea, biting at his skin and wrapping around him like a frozen shroud. The walls of the corridor glistened with an otherworldly sheen, their translucent surfaces pulsing faintly with a light that seemed to shift and breathe, as though the hallway itself were alive. Each of Taisea's steps left faint impressions on the frosty ground, fleeting traces of his journey that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. His breath clouded the air in front of him, hanging momentarily in the cold stillness before dissolving into the void. Rigidity, Taisea murmured. His voice was soft. You keep me encased. His tone deepened, strength growing behind his words. But the lightness of release is what materializes the slate. He paused, his amber gaze sweeping the corridor ahead. I have now entered a novel pathway, he continued. His voice was tinged with curiosity. Who has cued this to come to create? He halted for a moment, looking up at the faint spectral glow emanating from above. A shiver crossed his face, and his words softened to a whisper. If the veil is not there, what of fate? The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, its crystalline surfaces refracting light into spectral hues that danced across the icy walls. From the ceiling, white liquid began to drip, each droplet creating delicate etheric ripples as it touched the ground. The ripples expanded outward in concentric circles, distorting the light and casting shifting, distorted reflections onto the corridor walls. As the liquid made contact with patches of ice blue grass growing along the edges, the grass recoiled violently. It hissed in defiance, the sharp sound breaking the eerie silence and echoing through the frozen expanse. The sharp contrast between the liquid's purity and the grass's violent rejection set Taisea's mind on edge. He slowed his pace, his breath steady but deliberate, his eyes narrowing as he gazed further ahead. A large dragon skull loomed in the distance, its surface briefly illuminated by the cascading ripples. Its hollow sockets seemed to watch him, empty yet menacing, as though aware of his every step. From within the skull's depth, a frilled lizard emerged. Its triangular head glinted faintly in the refracted light, and its scales shimmered like liquid metal. The creature stopped on the surface of the skull, its unblinking eyes locking onto Taisea with unnerving intensity. So, you found your way to Trilax, the lizard hissed, its voice rasping and otherworldly. What? Taisea asked, startled but maintaining his composure. He stepped closer, his tone firm. Lizard, speak plain. The lizard tilted its head slightly, its tone cryptic and mocking. What's changed? What's remained the same? As the lizard spoke, the dragon skull began to shift, its edges elongated and twisted, the transformation both smooth and deeply unsettling. The once gnarled bone solidified into a perfectly cut block of materia, its surface gleaming with an unnatural sheen. Slowly, the faces of the block inverted and receded, revealing a towering black fortress encased within. Twin flames flickered ominously atop the sharp peaks of the fortress, their light casting jagged shadows onto the icy corridor. Deeper, Commander, the lizard urged, its hiss filled with urgency. The corridor ahead dissolved into liquid light, reforming into a passageway that opened into a large circular chamber. The chamber was vast, its dome ceiling studded with icicles that sparkled like stars against the dim light. Taisea stepped forward cautiously, his movements deliberate as the cold air swirled around him, carrying faint whispers in an ancient language. The frost beneath his boots formed intricate patterns, moving as though alive. Many things have shifted, Taisea said softly, his voice contemplative. He knelt briefly, tracing the patterns with his fingers. In micro-motion, it moves as one. He inhaled deeply, his breath steadying as his voice grew resolute. I have descended into the cold, so that I can unlearn. He straightened, his posture firm, so that I can become. As he inhaled, the air froze mid-motion, shimmering streaks suspended like delicate sculptures. When he exhaled, large icy spikes erupted from the ground, forming a circular wall of glistening pikes around him. He stood at the center, his presence commanding, his focus absolute. Closing his eyes, Taisea began to ohm, the sound reverberating through the chamber. The vibrations resonated with the crystalline geometry of the walls, and onyx omega symbols shimmered into existence, refracting light into a kaleidoscope of patterns. Kairos, Taisea whispered, his voice carrying an almost reverent tone. Drawing his dual bokan, he moved with fluid precision, their surfaces glowing faintly as they caught the light. In a single decisive motion, Taisea lunged forward, his bokan crossing into an X formation before slashing down with precise force. Energy surged through him, spiraling upward along his spine as he spun on the dragon claw, his movement seamless and deliberate. Dropping to one knee, he lifted his opposite leg, his body rotating from the hip. Arms and legs spread wide, he became a frenzied twister, his movements accelerating into a blur of motion. Sharp pulses of energy erupted outward, scattering shards of light and ice throughout the chamber. The atmosphere around him buzzed with raw power, the storm of his energies crackling like lightning. Abruptly, Tyseus stilled. Drawing a deep inhale, he condensed the flurry of energy into a brilliant sphere that hovered at the crown of his head. Exhaling slowly, his eyes fluttered shut as a pulse of primordial energy descended through his spine. In that moment, the world around him froze entirely. Time itself halted. Yet within the stillness, Tyseus felt the rhythm of the universe moving through him, a quiet harmony that resonated deep in his core. The storm of light raged around him, but his center remained calm, perfectly aligned with the forces he commanded. The scripture bends in on itself, Tyseus said. His voice was steady. He rose to his feet, his posture unshaken, his gaze sharp. Thought has imagined room to hold and be free. A faint smile crossed his face as he tilted his head slightly. Okay then, so that was always inside me. He gripped his bouquin tightly, his voice resonating with clarity. Movement, you've helped me reach singularity. The light around him began to subside, the kaleidoscopic patterns fading into the icy walls. The chamber dimmed, its frozen silence returning as Tyseus stood alone at its center. His breath was calm and even, and each exhale mingling with the faint hum that now filled the space. The air carried a subtle vibration, as though the chamber acknowledged his transformation. Tyseus' gaze lifted to the ceiling, where the icicles glinted faintly, their light mirroring the quiet resolve burning within him.